Silas Vane lived his life in the quiet, sterile margins of other people's chaos. As a forensic accountant, he was a man who spoke in the language of spreadsheets and lived by the ironclad rules of double-entry bookkeeping. To Silas, a human being was simply a collection of habits that eventually left a paper trail. He didn't care for the why of a crime, he only cared for the how much and the where. This clinical detachment was his greatest professional asset and his greatest personal shield. When he moved into the house at 402 Willow Creek, he wasn't looking for a neighborhood or a community. He was looking for a specific set of coordinates that offered a legal vacuum. The house sat on an outparcel, a 3-acre thumb of land that had been chopped out of the original plantation map in 1952, long before the surrounding forest was razed to make way for the vinyl-sided uniformity of Emerald Estates. Because of a specific, notarized exemption in the original land grant, Silas's property was a sovereign state. He had spent 6 months auditing the title before he ever signed a check. He knew the GPS coordinates of his property line down to the millimeter. He knew that the Emerald Estates Homeowners Association, with its 64 pages of restrictive covenants, held as much legal authority over him as a child's lemonade stand. For the first few months, the silence was absolute. Silas spent his days in his home office, a room of gray walls and high-speed servers, dismantling corporate embezzlement schemes. He enjoyed the rhythm of the neighborhood from a distance, the synchronized hum of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings, the predictable rotation of the mail truck, the soft glow of street lamps that were precisely 18 feet tall. It was a system. And as long as the system didn't touch him, he was content to let it hum. The first crack in the silence came on a Tuesday afternoon. It didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like a doorbell. Standing on his porch was a woman who looked like she had been manufactured by the very HOA she led. Lorraine Paddock was a woman of aggressive grooming. Her hair was a helmet of blonde highlights, and her smile was a masterclass in performative kindness. She held a heavy, 3-ring binder to her chest like a shield. When Silas opened the door, he remained behind the threshold, his posture as neutral as a blank page. Lorraine launched into a rehearsed monologue about the Emerald Standard. She spoke of property values as if they were a religious dogma and described the HOA as a protective family. She handed him the binder, her eyes scanning his hallway, searching for a deviation from the norm. She noticed he hadn't submitted a landscaping plan and mentioned that his chain-link fence was a violation of Section 12.4. Silas didn't argue. He simply said he would take it under advisement. Within an hour, he had confirmed the 1994 incorporation documents applied only to subsequent purchasers. His deed was dated 1952. He was untouchable. The first fine arrived 48 hours later, $25 for improper placement of refuse containers. Silas had left his bins out 4 hours past the window. To Lorraine, this was a test of compliance. To Silas, it was the first entry in a ledger of harassment. He didn't pay. Instead, he drafted a letter of cold, legal finality, attaching the 1952 deed and CCing his attorney Felix Harrow. For a week, there was a pressurized silence. Silas began to notice Lorraine's white SUV parking at the corner of his lot for exactly 6 minutes and 22 seconds daily. She was a predator of order, unable to stand a variable she couldn't control. Soon, petty violations rained down: $50 for a non-compliant mailbox, $75 for an unauthorized commercial vehicle. Silas realized he was dealing with a personality disorder armed with a clipboard. He upgraded his infrastructure, spending $12,000 on a 40-megapixel surveillance array with thermal imaging and license plate recognition. He replaced the chain link with an 8-foot matte black steel barrier. When Lorraine screamed at the contractors, Silas calmly warned her that his land was an outparcel and any interference would result in a restraining order. He turned his back on her, the ultimate insult to her ego. Silas then turned his forensic eyes toward the HOA's own books. He found that the neighborhood paid $24,000 a month for security to a firm owned by Lorraine's brother-in-law. It was a closed loop of corruption. He titled a new spreadsheet, Emerald Estates, Forensic Audit. The conflict reached a boiling point at 3 a.m. when his phone vibrated 22 times in 1 hour. On his monitors, he watched Lorraine and the security guard, Curtis Webb, outside his gate. Lorraine was unhinged, screaming about a fabricated water emergency while Curtis fumbled with bolt cutters. Silas checked the municipal pressure, it was steady. He recorded every scream, every threat, and every clumsy attempt to breach his lock. They were committing felonies in 4K resolution. When they left at 4:15 a.m., Silas didn't sleep. He prepared 3 binders, one for criminal harassment, one for civil rights violations, and one for the fiduciary fraud he had uncovered. The end began at the annual HOA meeting. Lorraine stood at the podium, basking in her perceived power, until Silas walked to the front. He didn't use rhetoric, he used a projector. He played the 3 a.m. audio of her threats. He showed the video of the attempted break-in. Finally, he displayed the ledger showing the kickbacks to her family. The room, once silent in fear of her, turned into a roar of betrayal. Within days, the HOA board collapsed under the weight of personal liability. The bank accounts were frozen. Lorraine Paddock was stripped of her title and faced criminal charges for stalking and embezzlement. Curtis Webb took a plea deal, testifying against the woman who had ordered him to vandalize the gate. The HOA settled with Silas, paying for his gate, his legal fees, and his professional time, while permanently recording his exemption in the county books. Lorraine tried to sell her home, but she had become a pariah in the very kingdom she built. She lived isolated, burdened by legal debt and public disgrace. Silas returned to his fortress. The X was scrubbed from his gate, and the silence returned. Yet, as he sat in his study, he realized that in auditing out the chaos, he had created a world of absolute isolation. He had won the war of data, but the victory was cold. He looked at his clean logs and his silent monitors. He was safe, he was right, and he was entirely alone. He opened a final file on his computer, not for a court or a client, but for himself. He began to audit not just the world outside his gate, but the man inside it. The conflict was archived as Emerald Estates, closed, but the study of Silas Vane had only just begun.